morning, everyone. It was a great pleasure to be here last year when one of our projects was fortunate to be a winner, and it's even better to be back here this year. A lifetime's work is the topic assigned to me this morning, along with an equally firm directive that I limit my remarks to not more than 20 minutes. Inasmuch as I am now halfway through my 88th year, or more relevantly, my 65th year in the practice of architecture, this allows me 3 minutes per decade. I'll try to respect both the breadth of the topic and the narrowness of the time frame by focusing my remarks today on a single issue that has preoccupied me throughout my professional life, shaping all my built works, but most profoundly, the 24 or so tall buildings for which I have been principally responsible as design architect. The issue I have in mind is sustainability, but not the environmental kind that is now at the top of every architect's agenda. Rather, I'm interested in social sustainability. That is to say, the capacity of built works to engender meaningful and mutually rewarding relationships between human beings, their institutions, and the communities in which they are embedded. Social sustainability is a critically important, if elusive, goal in the design of tall buildings on account of two inherently problematic characteristics of this building type: the vertically aggregative nature of its internal order and the inescapably intrusive nature of its presence in the city. The social sustainability of a tall building clearly has less to do with the way it meets the sky than with the way it meets the ground, wherein lies, for the most part, its capacity to shape and animate rather than merely preempt the space of the city. Hence, the encounter between building and ground will be my main focus in discussing a few of the tall buildings that have been a persistent and relentlessly demanding presence in my professional life. When completed in 1962, the Royal Bank of Canada Tower in Montreal, the first tall building, indeed the first building of any kind for which I was principally responsible as an architect, was the largest and tallest such building in Canada. Aside from taking note of its clearly derivative and oddly hybrid character, a body by Le Corbusier decked out in Messian drag, two remarks may be made about this early work. First, that it adheres strictly to the modernist conception of a tall building as a resolutely autonomous, self-referential organism shaped entirely by its own internal needs and systems. And second, that this huge urban development project of which this tower is the centerpiece, embracing more than 7 acres of land above Montreal's central railway station, was precisely the kind of opportunity to which I was in my youth most strongly attracted. That is to say, a building project of a scale that invited radical reordering of the spatial, volumetric, and circulatory systems of the city. It was, of course, gratifying to the ego of a young architect to have his very first building appear on a postage stamp, together with the Cathedral of Montreal. But in truth, the only aspect of this tower that I can still consider still worthy of note is not the way it meets the sky, but the way it meets the ground. A levitational inversion of solid and void that proclaims the tower's active engagement with the space of the city at street level. The World Trade Center in Baltimore, completed in 1972, exemplifies my firm's exploratory work with cast-in-place concrete during the 1950s and 60s, wherein our goal was a monolithic architecture that would be complete once the concrete had been poured. In this case, the harborfront location suggested a pentagonal plan form that presents a broad face to the street on one side, while its prow engages the water's edge on the other. Claw-shaped columns frame long-span beams on each of the tower's 5 sides. The floor plan of the John Hancock Tower in Boston, completed in 1976, exhibits for the most part a rigorous adherence to the discipline imposed by those characteristic internal systems, structural, mechanical, circulatory, operational, that largely determine the design of every tall office building. But we may observe the presence of one feature that seems to challenge the hegemony of internal systems, namely the skewing of the end walls so as to produce a notched rhomboid rather than a rectangular plan form. While this deviation has been accomplished in a way that is coherent with systemic elements of the plan, it nonetheless cannot be explained by reference to any identifiable internal need. A yet more pronounced aberration occurs in the plans of the lower 8 floors, where one long side of the rhomboid has been rotated outward to form a trapezoid. This peculiar form, so radically different from the undisturbed autonomy of the cruciform tower in Montreal, becomes explicable only when one turns finally to the site plan and sees the building in its urban setting. The rhomboid tower rising from its trapezoidal base is then immediately perceived as a response to the particular external situation of the building, most notably its adjacency to Copley Square and H.H. Richardson's Trinity Church. The extreme disparity in size between the tower and the church was, of course, the central predicament we faced. We chose to deal with it not by creating a gratuitous distance between the two. This would only have exacerbated the problem, but by bringing them into close proximity while positioning and shaping the tower in such a way that it becomes the contingent satellite and the church the autonomous center in the composition. As the foregoing suggests, we adopted a strategy of minimalism in the design of the Hancock Tower, not for ideological reasons, but because the situation of the building demanded it. In the determined pursuit of our goal, to achieve a symbiosis between the church, the tower, and the square, we excluded everything that did not contribute directly to this end, for we believed that only thus could we temper the inherent arrogance of so large a building and endow it with a presence that might animate rather than oppress the urban scene. Fountain Place Tower in Dallas, completed in 1986, utilizes a strategy of folding to exploit the sectional possibilities of the double square diagonal that is the distinguishing feature of the Hancock Tower's plan. In this instance, the form thus produced presents dramatically varied profiles when seen from different points of view, creating the illusion as one moves around it that this huge monolith, 60 stories high, is itself in motion, as if performing a dance. The diagram on the left shows how the tower's diagonally braced structural frame allows one half of its floor area to be cut away for a distance of 60 feet above the ground, so that a densely forested water garden at its base can flow right through beneath it. An act of citizenship that animates the space of the city at street level, just as the tower's profile animates its skyline. At a height of 1,018 feet, Library Tower in Los Angeles, completed in 1989, just barely qualifies as super tall under this council's definitions, but it remains still the tallest building in North America west of the Mississippi. Like the Hancock Tower, this skyscraper overlooks an architecturally significant neighbor, Bertram Goodhue's wonderful Central Library. Concern for this adjacency led us to adopt a complex planimetric geometry that governs a stepped building form terminating in a multifaceted crown atop a tower whose volume expands as it descends and finally dissolves at street level into an array of prismatic glass columns. Presumably on account of its proximity to Hollywood, this tower seems to have been an irresistible target for the makers of disaster films. It was the very first of a great many buildings to be vaporized in Independence Day, and later performed flawlessly in the climactic scene of Dragon Wars. Tour EDF, completed in 2001 in La Défense on the outskirts of Paris, is another example of my ongoing effort begun with Hancock to transmute the office tower from an autonomous into a contingent presence by deforming it in such a way as to make it responsive to the specific character of its urban context. In this case, the building's prow, located precisely on the skewed centerline of the Grande Arche, is cut away by means of a conical incision so that the tower makes a gesture toward the historic monument in front of which it stands. At the base of this incision, a circular marquise, 25 meters in diameter, creates a gathering place where passers-by are invited to pause and enjoy the axial view of the Grande Arche from a sheltered vantage point beneath the generous canopy of stainless steel and glass. Thus does this entirely private building, it serves as headquarters for Électricité de France, become the occasion for shaping a memorable public space. Though hemmed in by neighboring Chicago skyscrapers, Hyatt Center, completed in 2005, is liberated from this confinement by curved perimeter walls that open up angular views from its interior, while at ground level, the colonnaded south face frames a block-long garden that offers welcome respite to commuters traversing a much-traveled path between the rail station and the loop. Torre Espacio, completed in 2008, is the northernmost of 4 towers, each designed by a different architect, that have risen at the northern end of the Paseo de la Castellana in Madrid. Like the tower in Dallas, this building presents varied profiles when seen from different points of view. Torre Espacio evolves from a square in plan at its base to a curved lozenge formed by the intersection of 2 quarter circles at its crown. The parametric function for accomplishing this evolution in a constructible form is the cosine curve described in the diagram on the left, which rationalizes the points of intersection between the 2 curved surfaces and thus facilitates fabrication and assembly of the curtain wall. The size and shape of each office floor, as shown in this array, is different from every other, a feature unacceptable to most American developers, but embraced with enthusiasm by our client in Madrid, who declared it to be, quote, very Latin. An important characteristic of the cosine curve is that its rate of curvature is not constant, but rather decreases gradually as it rises from base to crown. This gives the resulting tower form its distinctive sense of lift, almost as if it were a living organism that had sprung from the earth on which it stands. At street level, the square volume is cut away to form a generous porch within which the lobby is shaped by the same quarter circle that then emerges in the body of the tower above. The Goldman Sachs Global Headquarters, completed in 2009, is my first Manhattan building after nearly 6 decades of residence and practice there. A block model shows the maximum building volume permitted on the site, which is catacornered from the One World Trade Center tower and the adjoining memorial. Searching for a way to animate this lifeless hulk without depriving our client of the very large floor plates it required, we began by noticing that Broadway and Vesey Street define one urban grid, West and Murray Street another, and both grids intersect to form the boundaries of the building site. We then seized on this circumstance to generate the formal articulations that help enliven the tower's volume on its eastern side. These, combined with the shaping of its western face into a sweeping curve, are the modest but nonetheless effective means by which this tower acquires a presence that is palpably responsive to its specific place in the urban fabric of Lower Manhattan. In doing so, it emulates and affirms a familial bond with its charming neighbor, Ralph Walker's wonderful Barclay Vesey building, which so ingeniously celebrates the circumstances of its location that it inspired me to do the same in a building project that also provided an opportunity to embellish the public realm at street level with a block-long glass canopy sheltering and animating a much-traveled adjoining passageway. Palazzo Lombardia in Milan, completed just last year, is the new seat of government for the Lombardy region, located not far from that city's most famous skyscraper, Gioponte's Pirellone. A slender bifurcated tower emerges as the fragmentary vertical extension of sinuous intersecting strands of linear office space, themselves fragments of 11 identical circular rings that comprise the main body of this large mixed-use building. Our tower thus assumes a form that is dual, concave, and casually composed, contrasting with and deferring to the singular, convex, resolutely autonomous volume of its distinguished neighbor. The complementary and contingent status of our tower is further enhanced by the character of its enclosure, an active climate wall composed of 2 layers of glass separated by a 1 meter wide space within which vertical louvers provide efficient sun shading while allowing maximum transparency of the building envelope. Like the tower's form, this double wall is an extension of the surfaces below that enclose the low-rise office floors and shape the central piazza, together with ancillary public spaces inviting access from the surrounding street at street level. Placing now the ground floor plan of Palazzo Lombardia into its larger urban context, we can see how the concept of interweaving strands has sponsored a formally coherent transition from tower above to podium below, and thence to the sequence of street-level open spaces that join the central piazza seamlessly to the city around it. A transfiguration is thus accomplished from emblematic object on the skyline to emblematic space at street level. In the foregoing survey, I have touched briefly on 10 tall buildings constructed in 10 cities across 5 decades. Diverse as they are in form and setting, all 10 bear witness to my lifelong preoccupation with the question of how such buildings can be so conceived as to enliven not just the skyline, but more urgently, the space of the city. From the earliest of my built works to the latest, this question has remained for me central to any consideration of tall buildings in the urban habitat. Thank you for your attention.